Hello, hello. I think we had some technical difficulties, so we got started a little late. I think we may have lost a few people along the way, but that's all right. Good to see those of you who stuck it out in the waiting room as we got ourselves in here. So we have, if you don't know where you are, this is the key ingredients of neighboring for the ABCD Unconference. And we are excited to have you. My name is Adam Barlow-Thompson. I work at the Neighboring Movement in the United States in Wichita, Kansas, and which is right in the middle of the country. And we only have a few people in the room. Most of them work with me. So I'm gonna allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll just do a modified version of what we were gonna do since we're starting a little bit late and we don't have we lost a lot of folks who didn't stick it out. So that's all right though. We're grateful for you. So let me start with who we are. The Neighboring Movement is a nonprofit, and so we work in our local neighborhood, which is here in Wichita, Kansas. We train groups in community organizing around using ABCD as kind of the methodology that we work with. And then those folks do local projects where they live. We primarily do that in the state where we live here in Kansas. And then we also have a faith-based component where we bring churches through a training experience where they are able to think about their communities where their church is located and be community connectors instead of asking people to come to their church. How can they go out and become community connectors? So that's kind of the places where we work. And I'm going to have Elizabeth, if you'd introduce yourself and then pass it to one of our other folks. We'll start there.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I'm the program director for our Community Animator Network program, which is where we teach and talk about ABCD with people all across Kansas and practice it in our communities, whether that's at the neighborhood level or at the community level. And then, and we also provide some opportunities to actually create some community building projects as well through that program. I am going to pass it to Catherine.
Yeah, so my name is Catherine Johnson, and I have lived in our founding neighborhood since 2008. And so I'm heading up the work that we do in the neighborhood and just continuing to get to know neighbors and then connect them based on their gifts. And we also have a neighborhood garden as one of the things we're a part of. So yeah, Christopher, over to you.
Yeah, I'm Christopher Swanson. I work here at the Neighboring Movement as well. And I'm the receptionist here, but then also kind of help fill in lots of our different kind of programs and areas and try and help out where I can. So yeah, good to be on a call with you all. And I think I'll pass it back to Adam. That's it.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, we are excited to see those of you who don't work at the Neighboring Movement here as well. And so we'd love to get to know you a little bit. So since we only have a smaller group, what I'd like to know, the key ingredients of neighboring is something that we came up with as we tried to identify what makes a great neighbor. So if you would introduce yourself with your name, where you're at in the world, and what is one quality that you think makes a great neighbor. And we would love just to go around the room, and I'll kind of move us. I'll invite you to popcorn somebody who is in one of the squares. And so we'll start with, I'm gonna butcher some pronunciation of names now. So is it Rishia?
You're close. It's Risha. Just
nice.
The spelling's not helpful. My mother was an artist and just messed with me really for the rest of my life. I'm Risha Burke, and I'm here in Brantford, which is in Ontario. And what makes a great neighbor? So I'm going to say someone who pays attention, not in like a super nosy kind of way, but someone who pays attention to what's going on in their neighborhood, the comings and goings of folks, things that maybe are changing, for neighbors that might spur you on to, in a caring way, inquire to see if there's a way that you might help them out, or or just be of assistance, or include them if someone seems like they're not engaged with their neighbors. So someone who pays attention.
Great. And would you be willing to tag someone else?
Right, I forgot that part. Joan.
Thanks, Risha. I'm Joan Sweeney. I'm not very far from you. I'm in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada. And what makes a good neighbor, I think, is being open and not being afraid to stick your neck out.
Right on.
And I will pass to Joel.
All right. I'm Joel Zaslowski. I am in Edina, Minnesota, in the United States of America. For me, there are like 100 things, but since I can only name one, it's someone who cares about their local reputation.
Joel, who do you think should go next?
Nithya. Or Nithya.
Nitya, hi.
There we go.
I'm calling in from Pennsylvania, United States again. And what one quality? Care and connection.
Nice. Great. And who would you tag for us next?
Carol?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Carol Konvalenka. I'm in a northern suburb of Chicago in the United States. And I'm completely new to this, but I have moved back to the neighborhood that I grew up in. And so I knew some of these people. And my parents' house was the first house on the street. And so I feel a real connection to my neighborhood. And I think that, yeah, there are so many qualities, I think, kind of like what Risha said. But I think also for me is being willing to spend time with your neighbors, not doing anything in particular, but just contributing that time to just visit with them, I think is kind of a foundation of our neighborhood. And then again, to be interested but not nosy and, concerned about neighbors.
Nice. That's great. Interested but not nosy. That's good. And I think Faith, if you're there, you're our last one.
Thank you.
And if Faith is not there, that's also all right. All right, so we have some options for what it means to be a good neighbor as well. And we have been at this work since 2015 and have been thinking a lot about what it means to be a good neighbor. And we've settled on what we call the key ingredients of neighboring, which is the name of this workshop, and are the things that we then put into all of the tools and resources that we create. We kind of center them around these three keys, and they are joy, relationship, and abundance. Joy, relationship, and abundance. I'm going to share my screen and show those to you, and I'm going to allow Christopher, if you could, thank you, do that. All right. Hold on one sec. I'm going to do that differently. Okay. So these are the key ingredients that we have named and that we share with folks in our world. We then define those out for you, and then we're going to very quickly move through some ways that we practice them. We may not have time to do all of that since we lost some time up front in the waiting room here. So the first one is joy. They're not necessarily always chronological, but we do always introduce joy first. Joy is really about yourself. And so we think good neighboring often starts with knowing yourself really well and being able to live authentically as you are. And so we all have had neighbors who have that centeredness and are really true to themselves and know who they are. And that's how we define joy, is when you're able to live authentically. And so we've developed practices around how do I do some self-discovery and reflection, and then how do I locate myself within my community where I can live out authentically those things that I name as who I am. Hello to Dee Brooks, good to see you. Welcome to our room. Relationship is our second one. And what we define as relationship is building trust by the giving and receiving of care. So relationship is the key things there are the giving and receiving of care. There is, in our world, most of the people we work with, they're better at giving care than receiving it. And so they much rather do like a needs-based thing where they can just go and serve somebody, but they're not always as good at finding, like making themselves available to receive care, to ask for help from neighbors, to see if there's ways that their neighbors' gifts can be utilized in their own lives. And then the last one is abundance. And abundance is focusing on the discovering, connecting, and mobilizing of gifts. My guess is, as a bunch of ABCD nerds, which is what I'm calling all of you, that you are also familiar with that. So this is the three key ingredients. And then we've developed all these little practices and tools to develop these skills. We really think that you can get better at these things, and that a connected community has a lot of these components of joy, relationship, and abundance within them. And they kind of feed on each other. So like it's cyclical, like the more of one you have, the easier the next one is, and vice versa. And so we're gonna look at some of these, starting with joy. So I'm gonna fly through this. We're not gonna actually do all these fully, but here's one practice that helps us cultivate joy. So when we're trying to live out joy, what we've found is if you go to some stranger and you say, so tell me what it means to live authentically for you. They're like, I don't know. Okay, what are your core values? Geez, I'm not sure. Like, I don't know for sure. And we need some like tricks and tools to help them name what those things are. So let's try this real quickly. Just on a piece of paper in front of you or on a separate chat window in your computer or something, make a list of quotes, music, movies, poems, art, other media that inspires you. What is something that inspires you? And then kind of next to that, write down 1 or 2 reasons why you love that thing. So I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to do that. You can do it in your head if you want, or you can do it. One way that I do it is I look around the room I'm in, because like I have artwork in my room, I have books in my room, I have music that I listen to right here on my phone. And so I have all those things actually around me if I don't remember what they are. So if someone would be willing to unmute, what is one type of what's one thing that inspires you from that list? What's one thing that jumped to your head quickly? Anybody willing to share?
Positive thinking.
Positive thinking.
I thought of a quote from Anne of Green Gables, and just, you know, I think it's like, I'm glad I live in a world full of Octobers.
Lovely. I thought I just recently watched a video of the song Creep by Radiohead being sung by the band Weezer, and they had all of these teenagers all playing music together. They all had instruments and they all were singing this song, which I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo. And it's like, it was this anthem for people who don't fit in. It was really beautiful.
Adam, I got one.
Yeah, go for it, Joel.
A quote. This is attributed to Confucius. I'm not sure that it actually is, or maybe it's weird in the translation, but it's always just inspired the heck out of me. Life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. That speaks to me because I am someone who generally likes to over-engineer everything and break down a process into 143 steps. And I need constant reminders, and I need constant internal pressure to just simplify and bring life back to the basic components.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. So what we're doing here is we're looking for things that help us connect with those authentic pieces of who we are, right? And sometimes we need some alternative ways to get to that. Another way that we do that is we ask people to think of 3 heroes in your life. This is taken from a book called The Light Maker's Manifesto. if you're interested, it's a really good book of how to name some of those authentic pieces. Think of 3 heroes and describe them to a friend, and then have that friend report back to you, what did you hear that I said that also matches who you think I am? And you can often find some of those things in your own life. And then what you start to do with joy is you say, now, so for me, like, I really like when weirdos are able to feel like they are a part of a community and can fit in. So I want to find a way that I'm living that out in my own life, because that's how I'm going to be most authentic. And that's how I'm going to be experiencing joy, more joy in my life on a regular basis. So that's joy. That's the first key ingredient to neighboring. We always start with that one because we think people who are centered in themselves make great neighbors. So if we're joy is our first one, we go to relationship next. Let me talk about relationship for a moment. So relationship is the giving and receiving of care. That's kind of the key, the heart of what we think of as relationship. And a quick story that we talk about here in our neighborhood, we have a lot of single men who are in our neighborhood. And we were like, okay, let's see if we can start partnering those folks up. We found one neighbor who had a car but no driver's license, and one neighbor who had a driver's license but no car. And so we said, oh, let's partner these folks up. We partner them up. They start, doing that work of, meeting to go do the things that they need to do, run errands and stuff, because in our town, public transportation is really crappy and doesn't work. And so one of the neighbors then was Catherine, who's on the call, was talking with them. And he said, my favorite part about this is that now I got somebody to go all these chores with, sure, but also he celebrated my birthday with me last week. And that giving and receiving of care became more relational than it was like, oh, I get to run errands, right? That's the key there. So that's what we want to do. So let's think about some ways that we can give and receive care. So a lot of the give care to neighbors ideas are things that are pretty easy. Well, I wouldn't, no, not easy. Easy is the wrong word. Maybe things that are more obvious when people talk about what does it mean to be a good neighbor. Take your neighbor baked goods, share something that you harvested from your garden, offer to mow or shovel or sweep or rake leaves or whatever is appropriate for your climate and culture that you live in. Write your name and phone number on a note and give it to them. These are all ways we can give care to neighbors. But we also want to find ways that we can receive care. And that can be harder because, it's hard to be like, hey, will you give me care now? It's not like a natural thing. In our North American context, we have this very like, I'm independent, I don't need anybody mindset. And so we resist care often. And so some ways that we've found that are really helpful to receive care from a neighbor, ask advice from a neighbor. I think that one's actually the easiest one because I think it's easier than borrowing something because I don't have to worry about returning it or breaking it. And so asking advice from a neighbor, borrowing a tool or an ingredient or something else from a neighbor is another way to receive care. Ask a neighbor for help on a project. Listen to a neighbor as they share something about they love. So you can discover their giftedness and invite them to use those gifts in your neighborhood. Those are ways that we can receive care from our neighbors. So I would love to hear stories. Does anybody have an example of when you've received care from a neighbor? Go ahead.
Just like, beginning to practice the ABCD gift efforts. And so the Jupiter that was so close to Earth just this past week.
Right.
So I kind of posted, we have a Facebook group, asking for a telescope, and nobody commented. But then one of my neighbors stopped me and it's like, did anybody respond to you? I have a small one, but you could borrow it from me. And I forgot that we were actually not going to be in town that day. But then, I kind of kept persisting. We did come back early, and I'm like, can I still borrow the telescope? Because I'm not very late. So we got it from him. We tried adjusting. We could never figure it out, although the Jupiter was right there. So we gave it back to him. But on the third day, he knew how to work this thing. So he focused, he got it out. He put the telescope out in his backyard, focused on Jupiter. Not only did he do that, he invited us to come see through it. And he was thankful that we made him get it out. And earlier, I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm bothering these people. But
Mhm.
I never once felt like that because it was something that I was receiving, receiving through
Mhm.
him and activating that relationship. And the gifts, he's worked in some space. I knew that, and activating those gifts, and it was
Yeah,
pretty neat.
that's a great story. Thank you. That's awesome. So I often tell a story about when I first moved into my house, my next door neighbor, I needed a hose for a garden hose. And my next door neighbor had one on his house, like, where the thing that's attached to the house that the hose sits on. And I couldn't bring myself to go ask him to borrow it because I was like, this rugged individualism that I've been grown up with here in America has taught me not to bother my neighbor, and that I should, if I need a hose, I just go buy one at the hardware store, right? And so I went and bought one of those at the hardware store. It was my hose of shame. As the neighboring guy, every time I used it, I was like, I can't believe I didn't just borrow it from a neighbor. But then later on, several years later, this neighbor has continued to be a person who I actually ask for help from all the time because he's incredibly handy. So he changed the septic pump in my basement one time. Not the sump pump, the septic pump. Like that's very vulnerable kind of asking for help, but he's really good at that and knows how to do that stuff. He actually just helped trim a tree in our yard. And so yeah, I've learned how to ask for help from neighbors, but it's still something I resist all the time. So maybe one more story? Anybody got one?
We
Yeah.
had a situation where we had a tree cut down and we wanted to keep the wood. And so we needed a splitter, and it seems to me, I don't know, at least my husband is always hesitant to borrow some, he wants his own.
Yeah.
And he's always hesitant to borrow, but this was a big piece of equipment. Our neighbor had one. He actually brought it over here. We used it. We actually broke it. He took it back. He asked the other neighbor to help him fix it. They fixed it. They brought it back. We cut the wood. We gave it back. And then we gave anybody in the neighborhood who wanted some wood. So,
oh, that's awesome.
So it ended up, just like pretty cool. Here, I feel like in the Midwest, I don't know where you said you're in Minnesota. I know that my mother was always hesitant to let somebody do something for her, because then she felt like she needed to keep on a tally sheet, what she was going to do in return. So, and I haven't lived here most of my life now, but that's kind of one barrier that I see, that when you do something for somebody else, they're, really scrambling for how are they ever going to, pay you back, kind of thing.
That's a great story. Yeah, giving and receiving in that story. That's awesome. Okay, so here's what we're going to do before we move to abundance. I'm going to challenge you to think of giving and receiving where you live. And to do that, I want you to think of your front door. So wherever you live, think of your front door. And then imagine, what are the 8 front doors closest to yours? So whether that be on like a apartment complex or a cul-de-sac or a neighborhood street, where is your front door, and what are the 8 front doors closest to you? And within those homes, is there anyone in those homes who you've ever asked their advice or asked to borrow something? Or is there anyone who you could ask advice or ask to borrow something as we move forward into the next couple weeks here? I'm not going to hold you to it because I won't see you. But if you do, and you got a good story from it, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear it. All right, let's move to abundance. Abundance is the third ingredient. And if we imagine those kind of building on themselves, you can think of it as joy starts with me, relationship starts with me and one other neighbor. And now I'm moving to abundance, where I'm creating that asset map of my whole neighborhood and putting those connections together and mobilizing those gifts. So we do think that they build on each other in that way. And it's not necessarily like you must start here. They kind of all flow within, however your actual life works. So for abundance, we recommend doing what we call learning conversations. This is not new to probably many of you. These are things that if you've been doing ABCD for any amount of time that you're probably familiar with. Let me pull up my slides again here, get those going. And for us, the way we've mapped out learning conversations, we use the old gifts of the head, hands, and heart. How many of you are familiar with that tool? Yeah, good, lots of you. It's a really helpful tool, right? It just helps you bring out what is in neighbors. It helps you talk with neighbors about things that don't maybe naturally come up in other conversations. And so here's the way we phrase the questions. No, every kind of ABCD practitioner has their own way of doing it. And so this is our version. So with the head, what's something you know so well you could teach it? With the hands, what's something that you can build, make, or do? Or we also like to say with this, we squeeze in this one, if you could start a business, what would it be? I think that question is a very fascinating one. We actually, like 4, 5, 6 years ago, asked somebody that, and she really wanted to start a coffee shop, and it's opening in January. And I'm so excited about it because our neighborhood does not have, there's not a single local coffee shop on the whole south side of our town because of a whole bunch of stereotypes and other things. And we're like, boom, we're going to have our first local coffee shop. And I'm going to spend so much money over there. It's going to be crazy. And then gifts of the heart. What's something you're so passionate about that moves you to action? And then I added this other question because I did this with a bunch of third graders at our local elementary school, and they weren't sure what I meant when I said, what's something you're so passionate about moves to action? And so we changed it a little bit and we say, who do you love so much that you would do something for them? And all the third graders had an answer then. And so who do you love so much that you do something for them is a great way to talk about gifts of the heart. And then gifts of the spirit is something we added. And it's, what are those places, what's that stuff you've been through in life that calling it a gift may be a misnomer because it was like painful maybe even, but you actually have a lot of wisdom because of it. So we have, well, Catherine, do you want to tell the story about our neighbor that you talk about with that?
Sure, yeah. So we have a neighbor who was really just devastated because her adult daughter was struggling with addiction to drugs and alcohol. And then in the midst of that, she learned that the neighbor right next to her also had an adult child who had been through the same thing, but was now on the other side of recovery. And so then I don't think they knew that about each other until all of this kind of came to light. And so then the neighbor was able to share her own journey and give comfort to the one who was right in the middle of the experience, and to say, like, you can get through this. Here's the things that I've done. And so, yeah, it was a great support.
Yeah. And then we have put that into, with our groups that we go to, we've put that into this little like one pager that is really easy to give to somebody and say, take this, and when you go do your one-on-ones, go and make these connections in this way. And so we also have some additional questions. Again, if you've been doing ABCD for any time, these questions are not going to be new to you. These are questions that we ask all the time, but we wanted to offer that to you as a resource. And so I'll have one of my team, actually, if you put that in the chat, that'd be helpful. And we can give those you're welcome to download that. It's a free resource that we offer and that you can use wherever, because we got it for free, so we might as well offer it for free as well. So any other things that you've done that help you access, like how have you discovered gifts in a way that's been meaningful and connected those and mobilized them? Anybody want to share pieces from that? Here's the real trick of this that we've found. It's the how do I get the conversation started is the main place of resistance that I think people have with this. It's one thing to wave at my neighbor. It's another thing to say, hey, can I have a learning conversation with you? That can feel pretty awkward and intimidating for people. And so a lot of times we work with folks on coming up with ways to get the conversation going. And one easy way is to notice the things that they obviously care about based on like how they decorate their home. If they put up holiday decor, stop by and be like, tell me about your holiday decor. What's that mean for you? Like, what's that about? And kind of start conversations that way. If they load up their vehicle every weekend to go camping and you notice that, stop by, ask them about how that's going, what's, those kind of things. So figuring out kind of those inroads is often the hardest part about it. So.
Good morning, Adam. I didn't want to miss you. So my daughter's been ringing me for half an hour before the session to make sure I woke up.
What time is it there?
Pardon?
What time is it there?
It was 4:55 when she started ringing me AM, and it's now just 5:45. But you just reminded me something that we say to people, particularly with like the head, hand, and heart, is that these are questions that we ask people anyway. This just gives an intentional framing behind how we might ask. Because when we meet people, we will say things like, what do you like to do? What do you do around here? Who do you join with? Like there's these natural questions that we ask. And this giving that kind of framework behind it can help people who aren't always comfortable with asking. So I find them really useful for that.
That's great. Yeah, I thought I saw someone unmute there. Or had a hand up or something.
Oh, that's me. So I'm going to start talking because now I've unmuted again.
Great.
In terms of helping neighbors just get their gifts known and shared, I've had a lot of success approaching it indirectly. One of my favorite things is, whether I know them or not, asking people, hey, what are you excited about right now? That speaks to gifts of the heart and passions, and often is a great conduit into other questions that I might ask, or just things that organically enter into the conversation. And there are some other questions that don't approach things head on. I love to know what books or podcast episodes or TED Talks have you watched that have inspired you? And then we can talk about who or what is influencing you. Who are you learning from? What are you learning from? That gets to gifts of the head. So I've just normal people, they don't know the language of ABCD. And if you walk up and be like, hey, what's up? What are you passionate about? They just, of course, shut down and think you're a weirdo. So I found some good ways of just general questions that eventually lead into where I'd like to go, or where I'd like someone to take me as I walk alongside them.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
I was going to say something similar, Joel. I have a little free library outside of my house, and I find asking people about what kind of books that they enjoy is a really great conversation starter to a whole bunch of things. I've learned about people's trips and their passion for history, or, a good mystery, and that just leads to other really great conversations. So I think that's a really great one.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you all for sharing that. We knew coming into this that we would have a bunch of people in the room who've tried many awesome things. And so we're always excited to learn with you all. So as we those are the three ingredients. So we've covered them all with at least one of the practices that we use to develop them. So joy, relationship, and abundance. And so we wanted to offer some ways to stay connected with us. We'd love to still know you beyond this little window of time. And so we've gotten, some of you've been on calls with us before and to know that we host these fairly regularly, about once a month when we're not insanely busy. And so we host Zoom calls that we do, and it's kind of a community of practice, people who are all trying it. So sometimes it's us sharing something that we're doing. Sometimes it's a guest who's sharing something they're doing. Sometimes it's just we all get in the room and say, what are y'all doing? And we figure that out together. So stay connected to the neighboring movement. If you are not already, sign up for some stuff from us. So if you go to neighboringmovement.org, our weekly, or twice a month, we put out a newsletter with stuff that's going on. And then I wanted to just highlight some of those things that are really helpful. So this is the shameless self-promotion part of the call. If you're like done with it, you can jump off here. If you don't want to, it's totally fine. The 52 Weeks of Neighboring is a weekly neighboring tip that we put out. And it does exactly the kind of things that y'all are talking about. What are the ideas that I could use to get beyond that initial conversation to actually start learning about who my neighbor is and building those relationships. We also put together a little, we call it the Get Together Guide. The Get Together Guide it's not a block party, because block parties can be really intimidating to people. And like, I can't throw a block party, that's too much. So we decided to call it a Get Together Guide, because we're not talking about like, get the police department and block off the street and do all these things. No, like get some lawn chairs in front of your house, or in the lobby of your apartment complex, or make it as simple as possible where you can actually be together with some neighbors. And so that's also Christopher, if you'd link the resource page, that'd be awesome. That's where all this stuff is. Our podcast, we have a kind of weekly podcast that we put out. And we had recently a series about how to neighbor. Elizabeth did a series with one of our other staff persons about what it's like to be in a toxic environment and how to leave that, because if you're overwhelmed by that, you're often not in a place where you can also be a good community member. And so we talked about that. And then we just this month are highlighting some things for Hispanic Heritage Month, which is a thing, at least in the United States, that we're doing. I don't know if that's all over, but so there's an episode that just went out where we interviewed some folks about some of those things. And then we will have more episodes coming up. We're going to get an interview with John and Cormac about the new book, Connected Community. And we're going to do a little like book study kind of, where like the podcast each week will highlight one of the sections of the book. And then we'll have everybody who listens go read the next section and then come back to the podcast. So that'll be fun. And then, I wanted to share with you all a tool that we created to cultivate more joy and how to make community decisions. It's called the Recycle. The Recycle is a tool that we created where we realized that a lot of times we'd be connectors and we'd pull everybody in the same room and we'd be like, all right, you all are all connectors, you should do something. And they'd be like, but how? How do we choose what we're going to do? And so the Recycle is a tool that helps to do that. You can use it on your own, or you can use it in a group. And so neighboringmovement.org/recycle, Christopher will put that in the link or in the chat for me. That's another place that you can go to get some of the tools that we use. And then the one that I really am actually here to promote, which I'm like 6 in now and I'm just getting to it, is that we created a key ingredients course for people to take. Is an online self-guided course. And so if you wanted to move through joy, relationship, and abundance with a little more intention, you can go to our shop and sign up for the course there. And it's through Canvas, which Canvas is like an online learning tool. I'm going to show you what it looks like here. So this is the tool. It has 4 modules, an introduction, and then the other, each one for each of the key ingredients. As you get into them, you'll see that each module has basically some things you can read, a little something you can watch, and then some experiments that you can try. This is a really helpful tool if you want to do this on your own, but we also really encourage people to do it in groups. So if you have a few neighbors or a few people in your life who you're like, we want to try to do something in our neighborhood, you could go through this, and the 4 modules, we kind of imagine them that they would take 4 weeks, but it doesn't necessarily have to take 4 weeks. You could either do it faster or slower, depending on what works for you. When you get into them, you can see what it is. You get to read something. The reading always looks like this. It's short, it's easy, and it gives you just some little background about what we're trying to do. And then when you go into the next ones, you get some videos. There's a really handsome speaker that does all these videos for us. We had to pay him extra for that. And then we did mini experiments, that these are the things you actually try each week. And so those take you through all of the key ingredients. And then once a month, we host a call for anybody who's in the course that is just like, hey, join us, tell us how it's going. Let us, get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. So the key ingredients course is on our shop. There's another thing in there. If you're a faith-based organizer, there is a resource that we use for churches that is like, you could use it in your church's worship and small groups. And it also follows the key ingredients using the same pattern. So, all right. I think that's all I have for us. Christopher, Elizabeth, Catherine, anything I left out?
Nope, not that I can think of.
All right. Those of you who don't work here at the Neighboring Movement, any questions or comments or things that you have before we close out our session?
Is there an ideal size of neighborhood? I know you mentioned 8 doors nearest you, but
Yeah.
do you find it's too big or too small?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. I almost am afraid to answer because there's so many experts in this room that they're going to be like, no, Adam, that's not right. But we always recommend starting small. That's kind of our methodology and that's why we say 8 front doors, because it feels like a scale that I can actually manage and not be overwhelmed by. When you're moving from, okay, now I want to make a neighborhood wide impact beyond the 8 front doors. I want to actually impact my whole neighborhood. I think there's some different tools that we would recommend from there that, to scale that up in that way. And so, Carol, if you'd want to reach out to us, we'd be happy to talk with you, although you could also explore many of the other ABCD circles, and there's lots of ideas about that. Joel, did you have some input there?
Yeah, Carol, 8 front doors is great because whether you're on the 34th floor of a high-rise apartment building or you're living in suburbia like I am, there's 8 front doors around you. There are lots of ABCD initiatives, everything from Abundant Community Edmonton in Edmonton, Alberta, which focuses on block level things. There are others which are at some units smaller than a neighborhood. Where I am, my neighborhood's 1,500 people. My block is about 25. And then there are things in between that where you can look at adjacent or like a 2x2 street, road, block, whatever term that you want to use, radius. So I don't have the perfect answer either. I don't think there is one. But the starting small piece seems good. And then you never need to ask permission to expand. If you're doing good and you're bringing people together and neighbors are having fun and meaningful conversation as a result of you, no one's going to be like, nope, draw the border right here. Do not go 1 door further. I don't want to have any part of it.
Yeah.
Catherine, yeah, we live on a dead-end street and there's about 30 houses. And there does seem to be a connected group at the one end and a connected group at the other end. And so, yeah, I was just wondering how many might be too much.
I think too, it's very contextual, like strange things like transportation patterns. Like in my neighborhood, most people wouldn't have to drive on my street. So if I'm 1 block over, they don't even know the name of my street maybe. So they wouldn't call themselves a neighbor to me, even though I think they're just right there. So, you know, or if you have kind of a main artery that happens to cut through the middle, that kind of makes it feel like two separate neighborhoods, even though it might be labeled as one. So there can be lots of little factors that may not be obvious at first.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're out of time, but also I don't think I don't know if that our host is here anymore. So, so we'll just, I guess we'll just call it and be like, all right, thank you all so much for being here. Check out neighboringmovement.org. Stay in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you and what experiments you're trying in your neighborhoods. So thanks so much. See you next time.
Thank you.